Hey everyone, in this video I want to talk about a few things. I want to talk about goals, values, and identity, and motivations, and many other things. So identity has been something that's been interesting for me for a long time. Growing up, I'll say through middle school and high school, and I'm sure I do a little bit of it today, I never really fit into a obvious or traditional social group. Let's say middle school, high school, I was never really that athletic, never really that popular, not the most intelligent person. Definitely was a nerd, so I had plenty of friends there. But even within that strata, there were different types of groups, and so I played many different roles trying to see how I fit in. I would, try to be a goth for a few months, or try to be emo, and I got into skateboarding, and then something that did stick with me, I did get into running and try to go through that athletic route. I tried to be preppy, and I would even change the way I spoke and the way that I acted and the things that I paid attention to, and it bled into my home life and how I interacted with my family and my brother. And I was just trying to really find myself, even along racial lines. For those who don't know, I'm Black and Asian. My mom is Filipino. My dad was Black. And so even along the racial dimension, I never really fit too much into one group. The middle school and high schools that I went to were pretty mixed when it came to even socioeconomic classes, but I would also say along the lines of race. And so I could have easily just hung out with, primarily Black kids or primarily Asian kids, and those tended to be the groups that I found myself aligning with. But as I grew, I realized that it was actually fun to be able to look at and notice the differences between all the different groups as well as the similarities. And it was fun to kind of be a chameleon, for lack of better terms. That's just what popped into my mind. And it was my tendency to move throughout different identity groups, if you want to call it that, was partially of my own doing. I started to get interested in it, but it was also partially that I just didn't fit in. And so there was a social pressure there where some of the groups that I found myself in for one reason or another, I didn't fully fit, and it was uncomfortable. And so I would shift to another group and it would be okay for a little bit. And as I reflect on that, what's interesting is that today, when I try to think about my identity, one, I don't think about my identity that often, but when I do, it's not in terms of how I think, normal people or many people think of identity. At least that's my view culturally on social media, and even in some of my peer groups, who, when they think of identity, it's pretty low resolution. I would say it's relatively simple, and it's some of the most obvious things. So race, your sex, your sexual orientation, your socioeconomic class. Many of my peers and many people that I've encountered, and I would say also particularly now being in graduate school, when people think about themselves and they think about their identity, it has something to do with oftentimes what Martin Luther King called the accidents of our birth. And so, sex and race, for example, things that you really can't control and you can't really change. So in some sense, when it comes to identity, I have always, and still kind of today, feel like an outsider in terms of the normal way that people think about identity. And I could be completely wrong in how normal people think about identity. It might be that most people don't really have the words to understand their identity and who they are. And so they go with maybe what is popular and what isn't social media, and what they see in the political landscape, or even in the cultural landscape. And again, it's just those things that are most obvious. It's, your sex and your race. And I don't deny that those things play a role. I just think that when it comes to trying to understand who you are and who you want to be, which could be the two questions relating to your identity, I do think that there's more there. And I think it's important for us to discover what our true identities are, or at least have the words for trying to grapple with who we are and who we want to be. So that's kind of what I want to talk about. I read a few books recently. One is called On the Self-Regulation of Behavior by Charles Carver and Michael Shire. And I'm currently reading The Neuropsychology of Anxiety. And one of the things that they talk about are goals and how important they are. Those books differ and the authors differ in some of the theoretical points, but both place a very high value on people's goals and their aims in terms of what it means for them psychologically and even biologically and sociologically for that matter. A goal determines your perception and your behavior, and it regulates your emotions. So let's unpack that a little bit. Let's talk about perception and action. There's too much information in the world. There's too much sense data in your visual field. Let's say if we just talk about perception. So there's two alternatives for how we deal with the world, given that we can't contend with all of it. One answer would be that we randomly sample the sense data that's in front of us. I'm not going to go into that, but that doesn't make sense, and it's not exactly, it doesn't hold up phenomenologically or neurologically. So it seems that what we do is, given that we can't pay attention to everything, we pay attention to that which is most important to us. We perceive the world in a manner that allows us to obtain our goals. So perception is goal-oriented. When it comes to behavior, well, perception and behavior are integrally linked together. Just thinking about visual perception, right now as I'm looking at the camera, my eye is actually moving. And if I wanted to look at something to my right, I could move my eyes, which is behavior, but really the way your eye is set up, your vision is most acute at the fovea, at the center of your visual field. And so if I wanted to pay attention to something over here and perceive it, I not only have to move my eyes, but I have to move my head and my neck and my torso. And so I have to orient my body on that sense data that I want to perceive and make sense of and interpret. And so you can say that perception and action are complementary. And further, if you combine that with the first argument, you can say that perception and action are goal-oriented. Now, when it comes to emotions, one way to put it is that you have a positive emotion system and a negative emotion system. Your positive emotion system is associated with the behavioral activation system, and I'm not going to go into the biology of it, and then your negative emotion is associated with your behavioral inhibition system. So positive emotion can be thought of as incentive, reward, hope, enthusiasm, and it's in relation to a goal, just as the same way negative emotion is fear, pain, frustration, anxiety. These emotional circuits are related to your goal. So as you're watching yourself, as you posit a goal and you watch yourself perform the perceptions and actions that move you towards that goal, you receive positive emotion. Now, if you encounter an obstacle, or if you just make a mistake, or you do something that increases the distance between you and your goal, or if you do something that slows the rate of your progress towards that goal, that's negative emotion. So perception, behavior, positive emotion, negative emotion, they're all related to your goals. And the thing about goals is that we have them even if we're unaware of them. So we have conscious and unconscious goals. We have some goals that are genetically and biologically instantiated in us that we really don't have control over, to the degree that our higher order selves don't have too much control over our lower order selves. It's a bad way to put it, but I'm going to keep it. We have goals that we set when we were younger, that perhaps we forgot about or we consciously forgot about, but we pursued those goals for so long at such a fundamental period of our development and learning that the patterns of behavior, of perception and behavior, are still, they were strong circuits that were created in us. And so we have these habits today, or when we're older, that we can't really explain why we do them, or why we're afraid of certain things, or why these certain words trigger us for whatever reason. So your goals are very powerful. And one more concept I'll throw in here is just values. So you have many goals. You can even think of your hypothalamically mediated motivations and drives as goals. I don't know if that's the right word to say, but hunger, thirst, you want shelter, you want to be socially accepted, you don't want to be too bored, you don't want to be too overwhelmed with novelty, you want to play with other people, you don't want to be too hot or cold. I don't know if I said that, but you have these, even those can be considered, primary goals, as well as the ones that you can create for yourself, as far as wanting to get fit, or wanting to, get that promotion, or wanting to make more money, which many of those can be tied back to those primordial physiological or sociological goals. You can argue that wanting to make more money means that you're going to increase your status, and it's good to be higher in various status hierarchies. So you have goals, and you have to prioritize those goals, and you have to nest them in a manner that when they do come into conflict, you know how to navigate them. And how you prioritize your goals is your value system. When you value something, you're placing a lot of weight in it. You believe that it's a good thing to pursue. So whatever goal is the highest for you is at the top of your value hierarchy. And it says a lot about you. So you have a value hierarchy. Your values determine your goals. Your goals, in a large part, determine your perception and behaviors and how your emotions manifest themselves to you. For me, I believe that identity is best construed at the level of analysis of your values. And it's an open philosophical question if we can create our own values, or if we have to discover these values. This is something that I've been trying to understand as I've been listening to Jordan Peterson, and as I'm going on my own philosophical journey and my own religious journey. What are the best values that enable us to have the best prioritization system of goals that enable the best patterns of perception and behavior, that allows us to not suffer too much, and also allows us to not suffer in a manner that makes people around us suffer. And so for me, that's just been a better way to try to think about my identity, is by asking the question, what is my values? What do I value? Why do I value the things that I value? And values are embodied often, and they can be unconscious. I would say they're mostly embodied, and they're mostly unconscious, and we don't explicitly or semantically think about them. And it's hard to try to dig up those values. Oftentimes, what we do instead, and this could be a helpful approach, is we just watch our behaviors. Again, given the relationship between values, goals, and perception and action, you can infer a person's intentions and therefore their values from watching them behave. And I think that might be the most appropriate way to think about your identity and how to understand yourself. It's by watching your own actions. It's by watching your habits. It's by watching your emotions as well, which can be a little more difficult, but we can start off with your habits. You might have this conceptualization of yourself as, in terms of your identity, as maybe you're a strong Black man, or maybe you're maybe you're identifying with your persona in terms of your professional career. Well, the thing is, you exist to a very large degree outside of those domains as well. And the sum total of who you are relates more to your behaviors that are constant across those different contexts. So not only, for me, not only am I a Black and Filipino man, but I have a certain personality temperament, I have a certain level of intelligence, I have a way that I interact with people of different identity markers as well. And so it's very complicated, and it's not exactly obvious to me that I can reduce myself or other people down to a few dimensions of identity. And one way that it's just been helpful for me to try to wrestle with who I am today, so that way I can get a better understanding of who I want to be in the future, is by looking at my behaviors across all those contexts to the degree that I can do this, and then inferring those values. And once I infer those values and I get some sort of feedback that these values are good and that they lead to better behaviors and perceptions, then I can maintain those values and identify with those instead. And one of the ways that I try to regulate myself and understand my values is also by, getting feedback from other people and watching how they interact with me as I'm behaving in the world. I have my friends, I have my fiance, I have my family. I have, to the degree that social media is useful and like anyone's paying attention to me, that's also a helpful source of feedback. And it's not perfect, and sometimes you have to go against the entire crowd and you have to make a stand and listen to your own conscience, but it can be helpful to get multiple independent sources of feedback about whether or not what you're doing is good in terms of your behaviors and the things that you say and the way you act and your habits. And to the degree that people are saying that you're doing something good and you feel like you're doing something good, and when you're acting in the world and you set these goals, you obtain them and good things happen, well, then whatever values are underlying those goals, that might be the thing to identify with, and not something that I would argue is a little more shallow, such as your race or your sex or your sexual orientation. So yeah, to try to sum up, it's been interesting studying psychology and biology over the past few weeks and months. Oftentimes, these books lead me to philosophical questions such as those that I've been trying to elucidate in this video. But some of the things that I've just been taking away is that the goals that you set, or the goals that were set for you, however you want to conceptualize it, they play a major role in how you see the world, how you act in the world, and how your emotions manifest to you. And how you go about setting those goals is highly dependent on, it's probably, I would perhaps say, 100% dependent on your values and your value structure and what you believe in. And so if you want to interpret the world in a manner that is useful for you and for those around you, and if you want to be someone that other people can admire, it's important to work through those values, understand what values are, and to try to adopt a value hierarchy that prioritizes your goals and therefore your perceptions and actions in a manner that makes other people want to be around you, and that makes you, happy when you look back on your day, when you look back on your life and you reflect and you look at your habits and your behaviors and you ask yourself, are you doing the right thing, or are you doing everything that you could be doing? I'm going to end the video there. Thank you guys for listening.